hearing is believing. I think, like many other people in this country, I didn't know much about domestic abuse. In fact, I knew nothing at all. Read a bit about it.
One of the most historic royal love stories of all times has suddenly gone wrong. King Charles, once the figure of control, was left ashamed after a confrontation with Queen Camilla took a disturbing turn. Staff watched in shock as he was bullied by his own wife. Prince William arrived too late to stop it, but not too late to act. "She has crossed the line, and I won't let it slide anymore," he said. With eyes locked and jaw clenched, he made a bold decision that shook the crown. And now the royal lines have been fiercely redrawn. Camilla's behavior exposed. For a long time, people inside the palace whispered about Queen Camilla's behavior, but now everything has changed. She had finally crossed a line, and this time she went too far. What had been hidden for years came out in the open, and it shook the royal household deeply. The walls of Clarence House had seen many royal meetings, but nothing like what happened on the morning of May 3rd, 2025. That day was supposed to be just another planning session with the king, queen, and top advisors. Everyone came in with their papers, notebooks, and polite smiles. At about 10:30 in the morning, Camilla stood up without warning, and her voice cut through the air like a knife. She didn't hold back. She turned to King Charles and let her anger pour out. One palace staff member later said, "Her words came out like fire. No filter, no hesitation." Another added, "It was like she had waited years for that moment." Camilla looked right at Charles and said to him, "You're weak, spineless, and pathetic." She accused him of always siding with Prince William and said he acted like a man with no backbone. The words bounced off the walls. No one in that room had seen anything like it before. The room was still. Meanwhile, a senior scheduling officer who had been talking froze mid-sentence. Others looked away and pretended to write something down, but it didn't help. The damage had already been done. Charles didn't say a word. His eyes dropped to the floor, and his shoulders sank. People close to him later said his whole face lost color. He looked crushed. When the meeting ended, the room slowly emptied out as aides picked up their papers and avoided eye contact. Camilla had already walked out, leaving behind a storm of disbelief. A witness said, "He just sat there like someone had knocked the life out of him." One advisor who had been working at the palace stayed behind. He looked at the king, who still hadn't moved. He had seen enough. Toward evening, they took a step no one ever had before. They wrote a full report about what had happened, and instead of sending it through the usual palace channels, they sent it straight to Prince William's private office at Kensington Palace. They wanted him to see the truth for himself, without it being watered down or blocked. That report didn't just describe the shouting, it came with real proof. There were time-stamped audio recordings, a list of 7 people who heard everything, and a full timeline of events. It was clear that this wasn't just a family matter. It was something deeper. It was a sign that something was broken inside the palace walls. A senior staff member said, "This wasn't just about Charles. It was about the entire system falling apart." When Prince William received the file that night, he read through every word, and with each line, his anger grew. He had always tried to stay respectful around Camilla. He had put up with her, not out of love, but out of duty. But this time, things had gone too far. One royal insider said, "William didn't just see an insult to his father. He saw a man broken by the very person who should have stood by him." Another added, "Something inside him changed. He wasn't going to let this go." By the next morning, William had already made calls. He told his team to gather everything related to Camilla's behavior. Staff were pulled into private meetings. Notes were collected. Orders were given to start building a case. William had made up his mind. Camilla had to be dealt with. By the end of the week, the results became clear. Camilla found herself slowly being pushed out. A palace aide said she didn't even see it coming. One day she was running the room. The next, she was shut out. William didn't want revenge. He wanted protection for his father, for the monarchy, and for the future. This wasn't about power. It was about trust. And when that trust had been broken, he stepped in to clean up the damage. As one palace source put it, what happened in that room wasn't just a fight between a husband and wife. It was the moment everything changed. It was the end of one era and the start of another, because everything they believed about loyalty and control had turned upside down. The full truth: late one night, a black vehicle rolled into the private gates of Adelaide Cottage. Inside it, a sealed file marked "Your Eyes Only" was placed directly in Prince William's hands. A palace source later said he opened it without saying a word, just sat down and read until everything around him disappeared. The file contained every detail from Clarence House, the exact time of the outburst, names of witnesses, and the recording of Camilla's harsh words. William read the report once, then he read it again. His staff said he didn't move from the chair for nearly 3 hours. After midnight, his body gave up. The stress overwhelmed him. He leaned over the desk, gripped his stomach, and rushed to the side. A doctor was brought in. A member of his team shared he threw up right there in the study. We had to help him sit down. He was shaking. The weight of it wasn't just in the words, it was the image of his father, a 76-year-old king, being torn down inside his own home. By morning, William's entire mood had changed. He spoke less, but moved faster. Internal calls doubled. Teams were restructured. Meetings were pushed behind closed doors. William's voice broke as he told his security head, she didn't just insult him, she crushed him in front of people who are supposed to protect him. This wasn't gossip anymore. This was fact. For years, William had kept his feelings buried to keep peace in the family. But now, everything has changed. A member of the Kensington staff whispered, you could feel the pressure building. It was like the palace turned into a machine. And then, something happened that hadn't before. The truth started spilling from the walls. People who had once stayed silent were now talking. Not to reporters, but to each other. A Clarence House worker shared, it was like a dam broke. People started opening up. I heard things I thought had been buried years ago. By the next day, the tension inside both Clarence House and Buckingham Palace could be felt with every step. Workers glanced over their shoulders. Conversations dropped to low tones. Some stared at their phones, afraid of what might come next. A royal planner explained, we knew something big was coming, something we couldn't stop. The original report had shaken the palace, but what came after hit even harder. Over the next 48 hours, 6 more testimonies landed in Prince William's hands. These came from Clarence House, St. James's Palace, and Highgrove. Aides who had held back for over a decade now stepped forward. They described scenes that matched the same pattern. A former events coordinator explained, she always snapped when things didn't revolve around her. If the plan favored William or Catherine, she would find a way to tear it down. Another staffer recalled a 2024 logistics briefing where Camilla had slammed her notes on the table. She said, you all forget who the real queen is. We all heard it. Even coronation planning in 2023 had not been spared. A decorator revealed, she said, without me, he's just a placeholder king. I froze when I heard that. These weren't isolated outbursts. They formed a chain. One former communications officer shared, it was all coming together now. Things we once brushed off had a pattern. She ruled through fear. People who had once served her directly now stepped back. The fear was shifting directions. Many had kept their heads down, but now they were watching the walls close in. One longtime press aide said, when William read that first report, it was like someone flipped a switch. Everyone knew it was safe to speak. For the first time, people weren't afraid to tell the truth. Inside the palace, Camilla's image started to fade. The woman once seen as strong and dependable now looked like a force that had fed off control. She wasn't just cracking under pressure, she was being exposed piece by piece. One former royal scheduler said she was untouchable for so long, but this time no one came to defend her. But the most powerful voice hadn't spoken yet. And then, behind heavy doors, the king finally did. For the first time, Charles let out everything he had kept inside. He talked about the weight he had carried, the shame, the years of covering up pain. A witness to that meeting said, William just listened. No words. His face looked like stone, but his eyes told the story. What the king confessed that day left William shaken, but it also gave him what he needed. He stood up from that meeting not just as the son of the monarch, but as a man ready to change the course of the royal family forever. Protecting the crown's dignity. In the early hours of May 6th, King Charles III made a serious request. He asked for a private breakfast with his son, Prince William, at Highgrove House. Nothing about it was on the royal schedule, and the press wasn't alerted. Just father and son meeting in the sunroom where Charles used to read bedtime stories to a much younger William. But this wasn't about memories or family moments. It was about pain Charles had carried for too long. And now, He was ready to say what he had kept inside for years. As soon as William sat down, Charles poured the tea himself. He didn't speak right away. His hands shook slightly, and his eyes looked far older than his years. Then finally, in a soft but worn-out voice, he began to speak. "She's not kind when no one is watching," Charles said. "She lashes out. I try to keep things steady, but every time we speak about George or Catherine, she turns on me." William didn't flinch. He had heard parts of this before, in speculations and rumors, but now it was real. Charles leaned forward and added, "This happens often, more than you think. She speaks down to me, even in front of staff. I let it happen. I thought I could handle it." There was a long pause. Charles then looked up with a tired expression. "I didn't want to lose her," he said, "but I've already lost myself." One of the butlers who passed by the hallway later described how William stood still for several seconds, not saying a word. Then he answered with a firm tone, "You don't need to keep going through this. You're the king." Staff close to the king had begun to notice strange signs over the past year. He had started pulling out of appearances without explanation. He left formal events early. His face often looked blank and far off. One aide recalled, "There was one day in March when he walked out of a meeting in under 20 minutes. Later we found him in the study. He looked drained, like he'd been crying." Now everything made sense. This wasn't about stress. This was about someone who had been quietly broken down. "I always thought she changed," Charles whispered. "But the truth is, I kept changing myself to make things easier for her." William stood up slowly and walked around the table. He placed his hand on his father's shoulder. Charles looked up, his voice low and clear. "Do what you must, my son." That one gave William something that no report or audio clip could give. It gave him his father's permission to act, not just as the next king, but as the only person left who could fix what was falling apart. Less than 24 hours later, William moved forward. He didn't hesitate. He called for an emergency session of the Crown Council. William arrived with the full report in hand. Every word Camilla had spoken was on paper, verified by witnesses and recordings. And now, after hearing the truth from his father, William had one goal: to protect the throne from what he saw as a growing danger. One of his senior advisors said, "We've never seen him like that. He was completely focused. He wasn't asking anyone what to do. He already knew." Another council member remembered what came next. William said, "We're not just saving the crown. We're saving the man who wears it." Everyone in the room knew what this meant. Camilla could no longer go free. Her power, once protected by tradition, was now being seen as a threat to the very image of the monarchy. William wasn't there to talk politics. He was there to stop the damage. "She hurt him," William said in that meeting. "She's not just a partner," one aide said. "She became a force that pulled everything off balance." One signature after another, the process began. Camilla's influence would be removed, not through scandal, not through press leaks, not even through divorce. It would happen through official royal action. A royal consort, stripped of influence by decree. Staff were placed on tight orders, but only those inside the Crown Council knew what had begun. But even among them, the weight of the moment was impossible to ignore. "It wasn't revenge," said a senior advisor. "It was protection." That night, William returned to Kensington Palace and stood at his window for a long time, his expression firm. What had to be done was already in motion. He wasn't turning back, and for the first time in years, King Charles slept through the night. The Fall of a Queen, a royal drama. As the clock struck 3 minutes before 6 on that fateful evening in May, Prince William walked into the Grand Council chamber at Buckingham Palace, his footsteps echoing through the hallway. Behind him followed 2 trusted senior aides, a sharp legal advisor, and the very ethics officer who had first looked into the troubling misconduct report months earlier. "This moment will change everything," whispered one aide as they approached the heavy oak doors. This gathering wasn't meant to show off or make a point. William had called upon an ancient royal succession protocol, one that had only been brought out 4 times in the past century. The weight of history pressed down on everyone present. 12 distinguished members of the Crown Council had shown up, including important representatives from Scotland, Wales, and the Commonwealth Secretariat. The room fell into a tense hush as William stood up to speak. "I bring forth a motion to protect the dignity of the Crown," he announced, his voice cutting through the thick atmosphere. He placed a thick dossier on the table. Inside lay 11 detailed staff statements, 5 carefully documented incidents that stretched back from 2017 all the way to 2025, and most importantly, a handwritten note from King Charles himself. The note contained just 4 simple words: "Let this restore order." For the next 45 minutes, testimonies were read out loud and legal precedents were picked apart and debated. Every word mattered. Every detail was examined.
I was lucky enough that I sort of identified that something was going on. I spoke to a lot of people about it.
Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, the vote. The result came back unanimous. Not a single member spoke out against it. Camilla's ceremonial powers would be taken away from her, effective right away. "History will remember this day," one council member noted solemnly. The decision broke new ground completely. Even though Camilla would still technically remain queen consort through her marriage, she would no longer work as an active royal. Her public roles were wiped out completely. No more royal events or pub engagements. Her special seat next to Charles during the state opening of Parliament was handed over to Princess Anne instead. A formal transfer letter was drawn up for her 26 patronages. "The firm has made its choice," declared William's private secretary as he prepared to deliver the news. By evening, William's private secretary showed up at Clarence House carrying the official decree. But Camilla turned away and refused to open the envelope. She wouldn't even look at it. "I won't give them the satisfaction," she reportedly told her lady-in-waiting. That night, palace insiders described the atmosphere as historic, yet strangely peaceful. One experienced courtier, who had worked under 3 different monarchs, summed it up perfectly. It was about time for correction. William chose not to speak to the media afterward. He didn't need to say anything. The crown had spoken through actions, not words. The decision hadn't come about because of some public scandal, but through proper procedure. A woman who had once held significant influence over royal protocol now found herself stripped of all formal power. For the first time since her marriage, Camilla was pushed out from the center of the royal family's operations. "She's been moved to the sidelines," observed a longtime royal watcher. But the most visible changes didn't come through speeches or announcements. They came through technology instead. By May 10th, sharp-eyed royal fans started picking up on small but telling changes across the monarchy's official websites and social media platforms. Camilla's name, title, and photographs were being moved around, rewritten, or completely removed. The official website was being cleaned up systematically. "It's like watching someone disappear in real time," said a digital media expert. Camilla's online presence was scaled back quickly. Her official role was completely reframed. And as each web page was altered and updated, people around the world could sense what was happening. The dismantling of a queen's reign happened through a methodical, calculated removal from the official record. "They're erasing her step by step," noted a technology journalist. "The monarchy doesn't make mistakes, it makes corrections," explained a constitutional expert. Queen Camilla's biography page had been edited during the night hours. All mentions of her active duties had been taken out completely. Her title, which once read Queen Consort, Public Representative of the Crown, now simply stated Wife of King Charles III. "The message couldn't be clearer," observed a royal correspondent. "She's become invisible," concluded another palace insider, as the digital transformation continued to unfold before their eyes. From palace to exile. By September 11th, the last chapter of Camilla's royal removal kicked off. This time it wasn't about changing documents or wiping out websites. This was about moving her out completely. "The writing was on the wall," said a senior courtier who watched the preparations unfold. That very morning, Camilla was moved out from her grand main residence at Clarence House to a hidden royal property tucked away in Wiltshire. The place was called Hawthorne Lodge, though only palace insiders knew it by that name. This modest 3-bedroom estate, spread across 112 acres, had once been set aside for retired royal staff members who had served their time. Now it would house a woman who, just months before, had sat right next to King Charles III during the spectacular Trooping the Colour ceremony. "It's like watching a queen become a prisoner," observed one longtime palace watcher. Her staff was brutally cut down from 19 people to just 4. Her private protection team was taken away and reassigned to other duties, leaving Scotland Yard to provide only basic surveillance through a small local team that rotated shifts. All her upcoming public appearances were called off without being rescheduled. the October Literacy Gala, the Royal Art Trust dinner, and a major planned state visit to New Zealand. The official explanation given out to the media was rest and personal health time. But behind the palace walls, nobody was buying that story. She wasn't sent away for a break, she was removed, one aide put it bluntly. Later, reports came out that Camilla had begged Charles to turn around his decision. She made 4 desperate phone calls straight to palace administration, asking to take back her duties even if it meant working in private capacity only. Every single request was turned down flat, revealed a palace source. Her emails were now being filtered through King Charles's press office, which stripped away all her independent communication rights. One staff member made it crystal clear the decision was final. There would be no going back. There would be no return to her old title as Duchess of Cornwall, no chance for a comeback. This was exile, internal, complete, and permanent. Her authority just melted away into nothing, described another insider. Charles stayed publicly silent about the whole situation, but privately, he seemed resigned to what had happened. Sources close to the monarch revealed that during a tense phone call between him and Camilla, she had pleaded with him, "Don't let them erase me." Charles' response was measured but firm. "I can no longer protect what you've broken." Those closest to the king said it was probably the hardest decision he had ever made in his life. But even a king cannot serve 2 different crowns. While Camilla faded away behind locked iron gates, another royal household was shining brighter than it ever had before. The public wasn't just watching William and Catherine anymore, they were actively following them and supporting everything they did. Headlines, charity organizations, international leaders, and even parliament members began referring to the Wales couple not just as the future of the monarchy, but as its moral backbone. The scandal didn't break them, it made them stronger, noted a political commentator. The recent troubles hadn't weakened William and Catherine at all. Instead, they had helped define who they really were. Now that the troublesome past had been cleared away, the path ahead looked bright and clear. "This is their time now," declared a royal historian. Prince William was being called the defender of the crown across all major media outlets. By the following week, the public conversation had completely moved on from Camilla. Instead, everyone was talking about the royal couple who had steadily led the institution back from complete chaos. A national YouGov poll showed his approval rating had shot up to an incredible 88%, while Catherine had reached a record-breaking 84%. For the first time since 1997, more than half of British people viewed the monarchy favorably, and it was all because of these 2. International figures started taking notice too. Official invitations addressed to the crown began specifically naming the Prince and Princess of Wales directly, completely bypassing Queen Camilla. Prime Minister Olivia Hart was spotted having private conversations with William during the United Nations Climate Summit in Geneva, with insiders confirming that protocol now put him ahead of Charles's own team. "The world sees what the palace finally admitted. The future has arrived," stated a diplomatic source. Catherine's presence only made the shift more obvious and powerful. On May 20, she hosted a major mental health summit at St. Paul's Institute, where she met face-to-face with over 300 NHS workers. Her genuine warmth, sharp intelligence, and natural grace impressed even the most critical members of the press. "When she walks into any room, you forget about titles and just remember how she makes people feel," said one international delegate. Social media platforms exploded with activity as fans declared her queen in everything but name. Meanwhile, William moved forward decisively, streamlining royal operations, cutting out outdated protocols, and pushing hard for complete transparency in royal finances. Meanwhile, the king was in a state of confusion, and it was something very crucial. The King's Dilemma. King Charles found himself standing right in the middle of a growing storm. Everything around him was falling apart and he couldn't do anything to stop it. He had always hoped to find peace during his later years as king. But now, his days were packed full of pressure and impossible choices. On one side stood Camilla, the woman he had loved deeply for decades. On the other side was William, his own son, strong and determined in every decision he made. Between them sat the heavy weight of the crown, and Charles didn't know how to carry it anymore. Camilla had just been stripped of her royal title and powers. She had lost the role she had worked so hard to build up and protect, and it had all happened through official channels. Led by William, not out of personal anger, but from a sense of duty to the crown. "That's what hurt the most," confided a source close to the king. William hadn't acted out to hurt his father. He truly believed it was the only way to save the monarchy from completely falling apart. Charles could see that clearly, but understanding it didn't make the situation any easier to bear. "He's torn between being a father and being a king," noted a constitutional expert. Charles looked completely exhausted every time he had to think about the whole mess. He was living between love and duty, unable to make peace with either side. "The king looks like he's carrying the weight of the world," observed a concerned palace aide. For hours each day, Charles would lock himself away in his private study. He held the speech William had delivered to the Crown Council in his hands, reading through the pages over and over again. The words felt incredibly heavy to him. Those words weren't meant to shame anyone, but they cut deep, revealed a palace insider. The speech was firm and filled with serious meaning. William had taken a step that could not be turned around without major consequences. Charles sat with that harsh truth, and it tore him apart inside. "He's always put duty first, and now it's happening again," said someone who had known Charles for years. He had pushed so many personal things aside throughout his life for the sake of royal duty. Now it was happening once more, and this time it was his own heart being pushed into the background. Charles desperately wanted to stand up for Camilla. He wanted to speak out to the public, to explain what she had meant to him, and why she had stood by him through all these difficult years, but he knew that if he spoke up now, it would shake the delicate balance that was barely holding everything together. "Any move he makes could bring the whole house of cards down," warned a senior advisor. William hadn't broken any rules or procedures. He had acted through all the proper channels. His decision had backing from government ministers and followed historical procedures perfectly. Trying to undo it would cause serious backlash, not just against William, but against the entire royal family. "The king is trapped between a rock and a hard place," summarized a political commentator. Charles said very little to anyone during this time. Advisors came in and out of his office, but no one stayed for long conversations. Charles barely spoke up during meetings. He just nodded his head, gave short replies, and went back to his worried thinking. His health started showing clear signs of strain. People close to him noticed he looked much thinner than before. His face had lost its healthy color, and his steps seemed slower and more tired. "The stress is eating him alive," whispered a concerned staff member. He ended up canceling several important events. Palace doctors suggested he should take some time off to rest, but Charles refused their advice. He didn't want to step away from his duties now. If he stepped back for too long, he feared he wouldn't be able to step back in later. "He's afraid of losing control completely," explained someone familiar with his thinking. The pressure didn't let up at all. Every single day, news outlets brought up Camilla's title loss and talked about it endlessly. Some reporters supported William's actions, while others questioned Charles' complete silence on the matter. The palace had not put out any proper official statement about the situation. Inside those palace walls, everyone moved around with extreme caution, unsure of where Charles actually stood on the issue. He said nothing definitive. He avoided taking any clear sides, and that silence made everything much worse. "His silence speaks louder than words," observed a royal correspondent. Meanwhile, Camilla stayed mostly out of sight during this period. She rarely left her private quarters, keeping to herself. Charles visited her often, but their conversations remained completely behind closed doors. People could only guess at what they might be saying to each other, but no one knew for sure. "Those meetings must be heartbreaking for both of them," speculated a palace watcher. However, William didn't slow down his pace at all. He took on more and more royal responsibilities each day. He met with government ministers, spoke directly to palace staff, and handled complex issues with sharp precision. "William doesn't hesitate, he just gets things done," praised a government official. A crown transformed. By June 2025, the inevitable moment had finally arrived. King Charles could no longer put off the decision that would shape the future of the British monarchy forever. The king knew his time for choosing had run out, revealed a trusted palace aide. One morning, Charles called together his closest advisors for an emergency meeting. The weight of sleepless nights showed clearly on his face as he walked into the ornate conference room. His hands shook slightly as he placed a handwritten letter on the polished table. "This is the hardest thing I've ever had to write," he admitted to the small gathering. The letter contained his official decision to step back from active royal duties, effective immediately. While he would keep his title as king, William would take over all day-to-day operations of the monarchy. The transition had been carefully planned out over several weeks of private discussions. It was the only way forward that made sense, explained a royal advisor. Charles had finally come to terms with the reality that his reign had been irreparably damaged by the Camilla crisis. He could either fight against the tide and risk destroying the institution completely, or he could hand over control to someone the public trusted completely. Sometimes the bravest thing a king can do is know when to step aside, reflected a longtime royal historian. The official announcement was scheduled for 3 p.m. that same day, but word had already started leaking out. Staff members were whispering to each other about the massive changes coming their way. "Everything's about to change forever," one housekeeper told another as they prepared for the historic announcement. William received the news during a private breakfast meeting with his father. The conversation lasted exactly 47 minutes. When William walked out of that room, his entire life had been transformed overnight. He looked like someone who had just been handed the world, observed his private secretary. Catherine was told immediately afterward. She took the news with her usual grace and composure, though those close to her said she needed time alone to process the huge responsibility that was now coming their way. She has always been ready for this moment, even when she didn't expect it to come so soon, noted a family friend. The public announcement sent shockwaves across Britain and around the world. News channels interrupted their regular programming to cover the historic development. Social media platforms crashed temporarily as millions of people tried to share and discuss the unprecedented news. "This is the biggest royal story since Diana's tragic passing," declared a veteran BBC correspondent. Prime Minister Olivia Hart released a statement within hours, expressing full support for the transition. Parliament leaders from both major parties praised William's leadership during the recent crisis and voiced confidence in his ability to guide the monarchy into the future. "The prince has proven himself during the most difficult circumstances," stated the Prime Minister in her official response. Meanwhile, Camilla remained completely out of sight at Hawthorne Lodge. Palace sources confirmed that Charles had personally called her to explain his decision before the public announcement was made. "She understood why it had to happen, but that doesn't make it any easier," revealed an insider. The conversation between Charles and Camilla lasted over 2 hours. By all accounts, it was emotional and difficult, but very necessary for both of them to find some kind of closure. They both knew this day was coming. They just hoped it wouldn't come so soon, explained a family insider. Within days of the announcement, the transformation of the monarchy became visible to everyone. William moved quickly to set up his new operations center at St. James's Palace, while Catherine began taking on major royal patronages that had been left vacant. "They're not wasting any time. The future starts now," observed a palace correspondent. The couple's approval ratings soared even higher, reaching historic levels not seen since the early days of Queen Elizabeth II's reign. William and Catherine's photographs dominated the homepage, while Charles appeared in a smaller emeritus section. The changes were swift and decisive. "It's like watching a completely new monarchy being born," commented a digital media analyst. As time passed, the dust finally began to settle on the most dramatic period in modern royal history. The institution that had seemed on the brink of collapse just months earlier was now stronger and more popular than it had been in decades. The crown had been transformed, not through revolution or scandal, but through careful decision-making and strong leadership. William and Catherine had not just inherited the future of the monarchy, they had earned it through their actions during the crisis. "Sometimes the greatest victories come from the darkest moments," concluded a royal biographer as the new era of the British monarchy officially began. The final point: breaking apart. Several weeks after William's transition to power, he sat down for his first major television interview as the de facto leader of the monarchy. Although his words didn't seem shocking at first glance, something about the way he phrased certain things got people thinking hard about what was really happening behind palace doors. "Every word a royal says gets picked apart by millions of people," noted a media analyst before the broadcast. During the interview, William briefly brought up his father's health situation and, almost as a casual side note, mentioned that Charles appeared much more content living by himself lately. The comment sounded relaxed and natural, but the reaction it stirred up was anything but small. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it, observed a body language expert who studied the footage. William's tone carried something understated but pointed. That brief moment sparked off a massive wave of speculation across social media and news outlets. The timing felt incredibly strange to many observers. Rumors about Charles and Camilla had already been spreading around quickly, so when William casually dropped the comment that Charles seemed to be enjoying his own space, many people felt like it wasn't just an innocent remark. He was giving the public a hint without spelling it out directly, suggested a royal correspondent. People immediately started wondering if King Charles and Camilla were no longer living under the same roof. The idea that the royal couple might have separated behind closed doors became much stronger almost instantly. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, said one longtime palace watcher. Observers began putting together the evidence they could find. Charles had been dealing with health issues and staying out of the public eye. Then William casually brings up the idea that his father was doing better on his own. To many people, it didn't feel accidental at all. Some claimed it was a soft way of confirming that something major had changed, reported a tabloid journalist. Others believed William had finally picked a clear side in the ongoing drama. If he had wanted to shut down the growing rumors, he could have easily said something positive about Camilla or spoken more about their relationship being strong and solid. But he chose not to do that. Now, public attention had shifted dramatically. Everyone was watching Charles and Camilla even more closely than before. Photographers had positioned themselves near all the royal homes, hoping to catch any moment that would back up the idea of a royal split. The media circus went into overdrive, described a veteran royal photographer. Camera crews were tracking cars, watching entrance gates, and even using long-range lenses to spy on what was happening behind the high palace walls. Every single glance, every facial expression, every public appearance was now being studied and discussed endlessly. Every move they made was being analyzed like evidence in a court case, noted a media studies professor. This whole situation had also brought back old feelings and painful memories for many people. Some believed the entire drama carried echoes from the past, back to the difficult days involving Diana. Years ago, Diana had lived through a very painful period where she felt emotionally cut off from Charles, while his attention seemed focused somewhere else entirely. Now, some people claim Charles might be going through something remarkably similar. "What goes around comes around," posted one social media user whose comment went viral. They pointed out that the pain of betrayal and emotional distance had found its way back to him. Camilla, once the woman who had stayed in the background during the Diana years, was now being seen smiling brightly in public while Charles remained mostly indoors and under tremendous pressure. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who remembered the old days, reflected a royal historian. The media coverage had not held back at all. The reaction was fast and widespread. Various news outlets rushed to publish new headlines, each one more dramatic than the last. Public comments online had grown even more critical and harsh. People were pointing out what they saw as poetic justice, what Charles had once put Diana through. Some said he was now experiencing himself. That idea alone had pushed the story even further, giving it emotional weight that went far beyond simple gossip. This wasn't just about personal relationships anymore. It had become about justice and karma, explained a social media researcher. More and more people were saying that history was coming full circle. The story had now grown from whispers and online rumors into a major topic across television, newspapers, and every social media platform imaginable. What are your thoughts on Camilla's behavior? Do you think the consequences were much on her? Let us know your views in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe to this channel. Before you go, watch the other videos on your screen.